So recently, in our quest to try to find ways to make airsoft guns more accurate, we've looked at different aspects such as BB weight, barrel length, diameter, and so on to try to find what is the best combination to make the gun more accurate. So keeping with that, today's variable that we're going to be looking at is different hop-ups to see which hop-up works best. So out of all of the variables that we've looked at so far, I have to say that the hop-up unit is probably going to be the most nebulous out of all of them because it's not a clearly defined variable. There's a lot of factors to it, as opposed to something like a barrel, for instance. Either a barrel is going to be accurate or it's not. You're going to put it in and either it's going to shoot straight or it's not. There's really not much you can do about it if it's not, giving you clean, straight shots. A hop-up unit, on the other hand, it's not just a plug-and-play kind of thing. You don't just put it on the end of the barrel and you're done. You have to adjust it as far as the settings on the hop-up and the other components as far as what bucking you're using and what nub or tensioner, depending on the terminology that you want to use. So in fairness to the manufacturers that we're going to be looking at today, there are other variables that you can use to try to make these things more accurate, but I tried to cover as many of the bases as possible to give you an idea of, using different aspects, different components to see, in the end, which is the more accurate hop-up unit. So before I get too far along in this video, it's probably a good idea that I give you some basic information on how a hop-up unit works, so those of you that have never messed around with one of these might have a better idea of what I'm talking about. First of all, airsoft guns have no rifling in the barrel. These are smoothbore barrels in the gun. It's also important to note that the gun actually has two barrels. There's an outer barrel and an inner barrel. The outer barrel that you see when you're looking at the gun has very little to do with how the gun actually functions compared to the inner barrel. This is the part that does most of the work. These can be made out of brass or aluminum or steel or any number of other alloys. Brass is probably the most popular that I've seen. In order for them to function, what they do is they cut a notch into it that gives a little window so that the BB can make contact with the bucking. The bucking is a piece of rubber that slides over that window. There's actually an indexing notch on the bottom of it so that you can tell that you have the bucking lined up properly, because there are protrusions on the bucking that actually fit into that window so that when the BB is chambered, it actually makes contact with the rubber on the bucking. So beyond that, the hop-up unit is then mated with the barrel and the bucking. It just simply slides in until it matches up with it. Your little index notch on the bottom of the barrel should line up with the center of it. And then there is a small clip that fits onto the barrel that holds the barrel in place in the hop-up unit. There's actually little notches on the barrel that make it so that the barrel is actually sitting perfectly aligned with the bucking and the nub or the protrusion inside of the bucking. The reason for that is that if it was slightly cocked off to the side, you would end up getting curveballs or sliders. So in order to keep the BBs going straight, you need to be able to line the barrel up so that it's indexed properly with the hop-up unit so that your shots are going straight down the middle. The other components of the hop-up unit are you have your adjustment knob. Whether it's on this one, it's on the side of it, or on the rotary, it's on the rear of it. And then there is usually on this style, on the version 2 style, there's a series of gears that allows you to, it's sort of a reduction gear system that makes it a little easier to turn the adjustment knob. And then you have your tensioner arm. The tensioner arm is attached to another little nub, which some manufacturers call the nub, some call it a tensioner, that fits on the bottom of there, and that is what makes contact with the top of the bucking and presses on the BB and gives you your amount of backspin. By turning the adjustment knob, you can change the amount of tension and be able to change the amount of backspin to compensate for the velocity or the distance or the weight of the airsoft BB to get the desired effect. So your main components with a hop-up unit are the inner barrel, the bucking, the hop-up unit itself, the tensioner arm, some sort of adjustment knob and then the tensioner. There also may be some springs here and there that work on the tensioner arm. So those are the basic components of it. And this is one of the reasons why I say hop-up units are fairly nebulous, because there's a lot of variables in how you set these things up. It's not just a plug-and-play situation, and how you have your hop-up unit set up is going to affect how the gun is going to shoot. So it's not just a done deal when you put one of these things on. You're going to have to spend a little bit of time getting the proper settings and the proper components and so on to get the desired effect that you're looking for. It's important to note that standard hop-ups and rotary hop-ups are not necessarily 100% interchangeable because of the design of the upper receiver. You have to make sure that that cutout inside of the receiver is deep enough to take a standard hop-up. Rotary hop-ups are a little bit shorter, so they don't take up as much space. So if you try to put a standard hop-up into there, it may not seat all the way in because of the cutout inside of the receiver. So if you're trying to use one of these and it doesn't seem like it's fitting all the way into the barrel, it's probably because your receiver is not cut out enough to accommodate the hop-up unit. So the first unit we're looking at today is a standard version 2 style hop-up unit made by Vulcan Tactical. There's dozens of other manufacturers that are out there that make almost identical hop-up units. And these have been around for years, so you can count on them pretty much giving you pretty consistent results across the board. One of the unique features about this hop-up unit is that it has an O-ring on the rear seal of it, so when it mates up with your gearbox, it gets you a good tight air seal in there, so there's not a lot of air spillage, and you might sneak out an extra 1 or 2 FPS out of your velocity. This style hop-up unit is a floating design, so there's a spring either mounted to the front of the hop-up unit or on the inner barrel that makes this unit float inside of the outer barrel. The effect that that gives you is that when the hop-up unit mates up with your magazine, that if it needs to move a little bit in order to fit exactly into that feed hole on your magazine, it's able to do that. So the benefit is you get much more consistent feeding with this style hop-up unit right out of the box because of that floating design. The next hop-up unit we're looking at is a rotary style polymer hop-up made by G&G. This is the standard hop-up unit that they put in their upper echelon combat machines like the SRS, the SRL, guns like that. So your higher end intermediate guns that G&G produces. One of the things I really like about this is that it has an indexed notches on the adjustment ring. So as you change the settings, if you can hear, there are actually clicks. So it makes it really easy to reproduce certain results. So if you remember, you were like at 3 clicks, you got a particular flight path out of the BB. It's very simple to go back and reset that setting. You can, like on standard hop-up units that don't have indexing, you could just make like a pencil mark on it or something to remember the setting, but I do like the feature that there are actual index clicks on this. Also, the locking ring that holds the barrel in place has a notch that mates up with the indexing notch on the bottom of the barrel. That allows you to perfectly center the barrel with the bucking so that you don't get any kind of left or right curves to it. This clip actually fits into that notch and perfectly centers the barrel, which gives you, as you'll see, very good results with this. This unit goes for around $30, which pretty much all of the hop-up units we're looking at today are in the $30 plus or minus category. I know there are much more expensive units that are out there, but I'm trying to do this video with the idea of people that have a limited budget that don't want to spend an arm and a leg on a hop-up unit. We may in the future look at more expensive ones, but for today, all of the hop-up units are right about the $30 category. The next hop-up unit we're looking at is made by ProWin. These have been around for several years, and I know a lot of people that have been swearing by them. I found them to be very consistent. It's a rotary style hop-up unit. There is no indexing on the knob, so as you turn it, there's no way to find an exact setting. Once again, you could make a mark on it, but it is not an indexed adjustment knob. it does have a set screw for adjusting the depth of it. So when you insert this into your outer barrel, once again, the hop-up unit needs to mate up with the magazine in order for the mag to feed properly. So if that is not at the perfect angle or the perfect distance, you can adjust this set screw so that this sits in pretty much exactly where you need it. And this is a fixed design. This is not a floating design like the standard version 2. This one you need to adjust that screw so that the hop-up unit will not move or stays right where you want it so that it feeds properly. The last one we're looking at today is made by RetroArms. Probably, out of all of the hop-up units, probably one of the fancier designs that I've seen. Just on an aesthetic value, looks really cool compared to the other hop-up units. It does come with multiple arms, so if you're using like an R-hop or a standard hop, you can use the arm that's going to work best for your situation. Like the G&G, it has an indexed clip that holds the barrel in. So you get a nice centered barrel on there. And one feature that it has that none of the other hop-up units has is a compression fitting that holds the barrel in. So normally there is a brass ring that goes in. It's sort of a bushing that fits between the barrel and the end of the hop-up unit so that it stays centered. These guys, RetroArms, decided to use almost like a plumbing compression fitting that fits in there and really gives it a good solid fit inside of the hop-up unit. Like the ProWin, this is not a floating design. This is a fixed design. And some people will have problems with these because of the extra amount of metal on the end. Because of that compression fitting, it may not seat all the way into your outer barrel. So it may be necessary for you to pull your outer barrel and actually drill it in a little bit so that this hop-up unit will fit all the way into your outer barrel. So for accuracy testing, I decided to go back to our good old-fashioned Mark I Polar Star fusion engine. We were shooting at an average velocity of around 350 feet per second. I was using tracers again so that you could see the actual flight path of the BBs. And we were using barrels that were 510 millimeters. These were tight bore 6.03 barrels. They were all exactly the same make and model of the barrel, so we were eliminating those particular variables. The first one we started out with was the standard Vulcan hop-up unit. Now with this one, we were using pretty much a standard bucking nub or tensioner combination. The one that we were using for this was made by Maple Leaf. It was their super silicone bucking at 80 degrees, I believe, was the temperature for the plastic on that. So it was a fairly hard rubber. So if you watch some of our earlier videos, you've noticed that we compared the different temperatures, 50, 60, 70, 80 degrees. We found that the harder rubber tended to give us better accuracy, so we went with that. So shooting at 100 feet, this was able to get us an average size group of around 8.87 inches. Next up, we used the ProWin hop-up. Now, the first go-round with this, we used it with the MR hop combination. So it had a straight arm that pressed down on a MR bucking. It's very similar to the R hop system. There is no tensioner or no nub since the arm presses directly onto the bucking, so it eliminates that one little component with this particular setup. Shooting this with that particular setup, we were able to get an average accuracy at 100 feet of 7.92 inches, so it actually performed a little bit better than the Vulcan. Next up today is made by RetroArms. And for our first go-round, we decided to use this with the same kind of configuration as the ProWin. So we're using an MR bucking and a straight arm, so there was no nub or tensioner in there, so the arm pressed directly onto the bucking. At 100 feet, this gave us an average accuracy of 11 inches. So this, for whatever reason, we were not able to get with that configuration very good accuracy compared to the other two units. And lastly, we used the G&G polymer bucking. This is the rotary style. This one we used a standard style bucking. This was the super silicone, same as we used in the Vulcan, with a standard tensioner. It's a tubular style that you see in like 99% of the HopUp units that are out there. This was a fairly, I would say almost factory style setup the way we had it, although the bucking that we used might be a little bit harder than what the G&Gs come with from the factory. But this was the big surprise. Shooting this at 100 feet gave us an average size group of around 6 inches. So out of the 4, the G&G HopUp unit gave us the best accuracy. So one thing doing these tests, there's always something in the back of my mind that it's like, what if this gun is just not as accurate as everybody says? I know everybody loves Polar Stars, and they're supposed to be the best thing out there since sliced bread, but what if we used a different gun? Would it change the results with these particular HopUp units? So in the interest of being thorough, I got out my old AEG. This is nothing really special about this. This is a Warhog made by EMG, which I think is Ares makes these things. Nothing really remarkably great about this, except the one thing I do like is that it does have a quick change spring system on it, so it's fairly simple to swap out the springs to get, you know, your desired velocity. So we used that gun with the same HopUp units, and we got very similar results. First of all, from worst to best, the worst once again was the RetroArms. Using the MR hop with the solid arm, we got a 11¼ inch group with this, which is pretty close to what we got with the Polar Star. Next was the ProWin. We got a 7¼ inch group, which is right in the lines of what we got with the previous ones. The Vulcan was second best with a 5¾ inch group, which was pretty darn good considering that that is just a plain old version 2 HopUp. And then our best group once again was the G&G rotary. We got even a better 5¼ inch group with this particular HopUp. So by using a different gun, it was very encouraging to me to see that the results were comparable from one gun to the next. So it lets me feel that neither gun is really affecting the accuracy of these HopUps, and we were able to get fairly consistent results. So after going over the results, I was kind of disappointed with the performance that I was getting with the ProWin and the RetroArms. So I started considering maybe the setup that we were using was not the greatest. So I talked with some people, and we came up with the idea that maybe it's not a great idea that the arm is pressing directly on the bucking, so there's no sort of nub or tensioner on there. So we wanted to actually add a little bit of something squishy that had a little bit of give to it. So we swapped both of these out. We took out the solid arm, and we put in sort of the standard one that uses a nub inside of it, or a tensioner, depending on which terminology you like better. And we actually got better results with that. With the ProWin, we improved from a 7¼ inch group to a 6 inch group. So by adding that nub in there, it actually made the accuracy a lot better. And when we did the RetroArms with that same setup, we improved from an 11¼ inch group up to a 7¾ inch group, so it almost doubled the accuracy on it. So by using the RetroArms with an MR hop bucking and a nub, not using the solid arm in there, it actually improved it. So that goes to say, if you're planning on using one of these RetroArms ones, use the standard nub or tensioner to press down on your bucking. Don't just use that solid arm because for whatever reason, it does not give you good accuracy. The last variable we tried was using the super silicone buckings made by Maple Leaf. Those were pretty much standard buckings rather than the MR hop buckings, and we used the nub in it. We actually improved the accuracy on this up to 7 inches, so it actually gave us a much better accuracy. So in ranking all of the different HopUp units from worst to best, worst was the RetroArms with an MR hop bucking, got an 11 inch group. Next better was the ProWin with the MR hop bucking and no nub. This got 7.81 inch group. When we added a nub to the RetroArms, it gave us a 7 3/4 inch group. So it actually improved on the ProWin, and it actually improved on what it was doing without the nub. So that shows that the RetroArms at least needs to have a nub in there. Next best was the Vulcan. This was right in the middle as far as all of the different HopUp units performed. This gave us a 7.31 inch group, which was fairly consistent. All around, we were getting around 5 to 7 inch groups with this, which was very consistent. Next best was the RetroArms with a super silicone bucking. So we took this, we took out the MR hop bucking, we used a standard silicone bucking by Maple Leaf, and we improved our accuracy to 7 inches. Next best was the ProWin with an MR hop and a nub. So we kept the MR hop bucking, we added a nub on this, or a tensioner, depending on what terminology. And the tensioner, by the way, was just a standard tubular one. It just looks like a piece of wire sheathing on it. This one, we got a 6 inch group. So this was our second best. And once again, our best performing hop-up unit, surprisingly, was the G&G rotary hop-up with a 5.85 inch average accuracy at 100 feet. So what can you get from all this? Well, for the variables that we're using with a super silicone bucking, pretty much using all Maple Leaf hop-up buckings on all of these guns, the best overall accuracy we got was the good old-fashioned G&G. Now, that doesn't mean that it's absolutely going to work out for you the same as it did for us, because like I said, there's a lot of variables there with how you set up your bucking and how you set up your tensioner and what amount of hop that you give it by adjusting the knobs. So there's a lot to it. But consistency-wise, it's hard to argue that, you know, with the results that we got, that we did get a better accuracy with the G&G hop-up. So I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. I'm sure nobody's going to hold back. You usually don't, so I'll wait and see what you think about that. And we're going to look at some other variables with accuracy with airsoft guns. So stick around, and until then, don't let the bastards get you down.